Hi guys, back once again for another video. Up until now I've been doing tutorial videos, but today I'm going to do something slightly different, which is going to be a walkthrough video, basically describing a remix that I was involved in around about 96, 97. I did this remix under the guise of Banana Republic, which was myself and my ex-partner Gavin DJ Face Mills, and the track is called Boundaries by Lena Conquest. So let's just give you a little bit of a background about me and Gav, and also the studio equipment that we used to use. Now Gav came from the early house scene, where he was a prominent DJ on that scene at the time, playing at raves such as Energy and Biology and Rain Dance, etc., etc. I came from a more musical background. I used to play in bands in the 80s. I had a jazz funk band and a jazz quartet playing sort of modern jazz, and a Latin jazz fusion band as well. So we pooled our resources, we managed to get a development deal, and we spent the money on our studio equipment. Now around about that time, most producers, their weapon of choice would be the Akai S1000, and almost every studio had Yamaha NS10Ms as well. But when we set about shopping for our studio, we decided to go down a slightly different route. We bought a Kurzweil K2000 sampler. We had a Roland S770. We had a EMU 64. Now the RAM, I can remember, for example, in the EMU E64 was 16 megabytes. So obviously compared to my MacBook that I've got now, which has got 16 gigabytes of RAM, it obviously pales into insignificance. Now for the sort of the hardware, we had a Soundcraft Spirit Studio 24 channel mixer. We used JBL Control 5 monitors. On the sort of outboard section, we had, I think it might have been an LXP7 Lexicon reverb. We had an Alesis compressor 3630 Drama Gate unit maybe. I think we had which was part of our rinsing sound, was a second-hand Eventide harmonizer, which we used for those real nice sort of trippy, heavily fed back delay sounds that you would see on the mixes that were known as our skunk dubs. As far as sound modules goes, the predominant one really was the Roland JV1080, and also the mother keyboard that we used was a Roland A90 expanded, which had a JV1080 sound card in it, and the Rhodes sound out of that featured heavily on quite a few of our productions. Now, up until that point, we used to sign our tracks to a label called Underground Vibe, and we did 6 volumes of a project called Anorak Tracks, which was like disco house. Search it on YouTube, you'll get where I'm coming from. But off the back of that, it just meant that Gav and I became absolute dons at sort of sampling, manipulating samples. Now, what you got to remember back then, to get samples to fit, you'd have to time stretch, you'd have to pitch shift to get them in key. It was quite a lot of work, and also the sampling bandwidth was nowhere as good as it is these days. So probably that quite accounted for the rawness of the sound around about that time. Now, we were fortunate enough to be involved in the fledgling UK garage scene, also known as the speed garage scene, where you'd have a fusion of British producers, house producers, taking influences off the back of the drum and bass era of the early 90s to form this sort of swingy, heavily US influenced sound, referencing producers like Masters at Work, Roger Sanchez, Todd Terry, to name but a few. Now, we worked out that part of the charm of their sound was the swing and the shuffle that they used to achieve. So Gav went out and bought an MPC, an Akai MPC 60, which was which was a great machine to really lock into that kind of shuffle and that groove. And also, finally, worth noting, as part of the studio, now most people these days are on Ableton or Logic, for example, and you take the fact that it's got audio in it for granted. Now, back then, all our audio recording was either done by sampling, or we used to have at least, I'm not sure, it was an ADAT. I can't remember the name of the manufacturer now, but basically it was an 8-channel digital recorder. So we'd also use a Tascam DA20 DAT machine as well. Now let's go on to talk about this remix. This is a track called Boundaries by Lena Conquest. The original is sort of like a mid-tempo kind of rare groove funky track with some really nice elements. Got a great lyric and a great haunting melody, and also some sort of spoken lyrics as well, and some scratching. So we were the DAT with the samples was delivered to us, and we set about it. Let's have a little listen to the track.
Territorial disputes, talking about boundaries, when we deal in absolutes, when people lose their faces, are preoccupied with places, and whether or not the races that flow through your veins are apropos. This land is my land, this land is your land, but it was their land first. Whose world is it anyway? Ethnic division,
fatal collisions.
It's easier to hate.
We cannot tolerate.
The people die and babies cry. We find out why or live a lie. Make me wanna holler. Throw up both my hands. Make me wanna holler. Throw up both my hands. Territorial dispute, talking about boundaries. They said he had a job to do. No questions asked, no answers given. Just pull the trigger and bring a blue rip. No compromise.
What's the score?
No compromise.
Let's shoot us some more.
When I did not raise my hand, the man in the uniform came to me and insisted I did. I was afraid. We were all afraid. In the name of the earth,
can I get a witness?
The people die and babies cry. We find out why or live a lie. Make me wanna holler. Throw up both my hands. Make me wanna holler. Throw up both my hands.
So there you get the idea. That's the original Lena Conquest Boundaries. Let's have a little look at the Banana Republic mix. Now, on the original there, you heard there's some really nice musical elements, some funky guitar, some little brass stabs, some strings, some piano, etc. There's a good chance that we would have used some of those elements to make sample stab chords out of. So let's hear it right from the top. Straight away you can hear that really nice raw sort of US style garage shuffle on the drums. Comes straight out of the MPC 60. Absolutely famous for that sound. Also worth noting there is that conga preset. Now I believe at one point during our time together, Gav and I got a percussionist in and sampled him, sampling congas, various hand percussion, bongos, timbales, etc., etc. And that sounds pretty much like a conga sound that we had recorded. Now that in the mix, that is quite a signature part of this track, because you knew that you was out that night and you heard this track coming in, that nice sort of that conga pattern. You know that Boundaries by Lena Conquest was coming in. Right, as I was saying earlier, the roads from the A90 was quite a signature part of the Banana Republic sound, and what we did to make it just a little bit more original than anyone else who had a JV 1080 at the time was I'd record an 8-bar piano part in, and we'd stick it in the sampler, re-trigger it, and I would use a Morley wah-wah pedal to modulate the sound. Now, Morley wah-wah pedal would be, it's actually a guitarist effects pedal that's, imagine Nile Rodgers from Chic, to get that nice sort of waka-chaka sound. He would use that as an effect on guitar, but I just thought it might be really nice to use that on the Rhodes. Now, in the JV 1080, there was actually a preset called Psycho Rhodes, which kind of had a very sort of strict, fast sort of tremolo wah-wah sound on it. But this would just make it a little bit more original. Listen to the way that the piano part sort of pans out over the 8 bars. Okay, now you hear that nice sort of high-pitched sort of stab chord sound that comes in. Refer to one of my earlier videos about making sampled stabs, but I'm pretty certain that we would have used the sounds that were sent to us as part of the parts of the remix, straight off the multi-track. There would have been guitars, there would have been pianos, etc. To me, that sounds like it's a sound that's made out of like a DX7 type piano, maybe a bit of organ underneath, or it's that kind of stab chord sound. So, but again, a big signature part of this track.
Yeah. Take on the mix.
Can you hear in there the little funky guitar pattern? That probably come off the original mix as well. And importantly to mention at this point was the bass that we used in our studio. We're fortunate enough to have a Roland Juno 106 and a Roland SH 101. Now the Juno 106, as you probably know, is a polyphonic synth, but the SH 101 was a mono synth, but absolutely perfect for bass. In fact, you could actually get the SH 101 with a connecting part which was a hand controller where you could use it for modulation and pitch bend, and also a guitar strap, so you could actually play it like a guitarist. Check out some sort of mid-80s sort of funk and soul band videos on YouTube where the bass player might be playing bass off a keyboard standing alongside the guitarist. But really, really cool synth, and quite a prominent sound around about that time.
All of our tricks. Get up in like this. Check it out.
Are preoccupied with places and whether or not the races that flow through your veins are apropos. This land is my land, this land is your land, but it was their land first. Whose world is it anyway? And the division.
can you hear how up to this point the drums almost sound like they're on a 1-bar loop, maybe little subtle changes coming towards the end of the section, dropping one kick drum beat, but pretty much the drums sound like a really short loop going round and round and round, and we're gradually adding elements. We've started with the with that nice sort of sample stab chord, brought in the bass, a little bit of a funky guitar sound in the background, the nice wah-wah Rhodes, and because we time stretched this track from the original, which was about 100 BPM up to 124, you kind of got that really sort of accentuated vibrato on the vocal. And because it's like a kind of a semi sort of spoken vocal, especially when she sings the, you know, talking about boundaries lyric, you got that really nice sort of accentuated vibrato, which is really common around about that time, because a lot of remixes were of sort of down-tempo R&B tracks, and you had no choice. You can sometimes vocals were re-sung, but very often they were pitched from a stupid tempo, maybe 80 BPM all the way up to 120. So it was kind of accepted that the vocal was going to sound like that.
Throwing both my hands, make me wanna holler. Throwing both my hands.
Okay, another great point to note here, the high string that comes in at this point. The high string probably came off of the E64, because the EMU was the latest in a range of samplers, stretching all the way back to the late 70s with the emulator. And the emulator were known for their sound libraries, particularly live sounding strings. And the E64 came bundled with some really nice, authentic sort of orchestral strings. I mean, it's sort of commonplace now when you buy a Logic or whatever, and there's probably 101 different sort of samples of strings now. They're equally as good, but at the time, the E64 had the living strings. Okay, can you hear that previous section there? First of all, it's great to have a vocal that, when you're stretching it from 100 BPM up to 124, the groove of the way she sung it really translates into this sort of faster tempo. But in that section there, some great lyrical components. We dropped out the piano and the stabs, and it was just a pure sort of funky, you know, that really nice shuffly drum pattern and the sub bass going on underneath, which then leads us up really nicely to the brand new stab chord section, which comes in this section.
Throw up both my hands. Ooh.
And Marvin said,
make me wanna holler. Throw up both my hands.
break it down.
Yeah, that stab chord sound. Please refer to one of my earlier videos on making custom sample stabs, but it sounds to me like that's a combination of possibly a piano, a Rhodes, organ, those kind of textures and timbers in there, and also the pattern that it's playing, that sort of dun 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 dun, really nice and tense, goes completely with the feel and the groove of the track.
Yeah. It's a daily operation. Daily operation. It's a daily operation. Yeah.
That scratchy in there, so goddamn funky, and the rap that goes with it as well, just really translates into this sort of mid 120s BPM kind of garagey track.
Yeah. It's a daily operation. Yeah, and Marvin said. It's a daily operation. Yeah, and Marvin said.
Boundaries, territorial disputes. Talk about boundaries, such a catch-22. He had to split
Pays the price for a ticket to paradise.
where the unknown soldier rests in peace and enjoys a luscious feast to leave. Don't follow the coward, don't call him away. Didn't want to kill his brother.
Didn't wanna be a pimp.
Broke the rule, but he ain't no fool. Made a mockery of hypocrisy. No pledge of allegiance to genocide.
No hidden desire for suicide.
The people die and babies cry. We find out why or live a lie.
Yeah, and Marvin said.
Just listening back through this now, just so many great sort of throwaway lyrics, and Marvin said makes me want to holler, and just the way it translates so well to this faster BPM. Like I was saying earlier, you know, like the tracks that were remixed around about this time just sounded absolutely wrong, being sped up by so much. But I think because when it was sung at the original tempo, she was locked into that groove, and it just really lent itself to being sped up so well.
Make me wanna holler. Throw up both my hands.
Yeah, and Marvin said.
Make me wanna holler. Throw up both my hands.
Yeah.
Runaway soldier. They say you lost your head. Runaway soldier. They say you're better dead. Really wanna holler. Throw up both my hands. Really wanna holler. Throw up both my hands. Runaway soldier.
Okay, anyone roughly familiar with the Banana Republic stuff? Gav would always indulge me in putting in some kind of solo into the track somewhere. Normally be on the outro, either a piano or a Hammond organ or a Rhodes solo, sometimes a vibe solo. But this track didn't really lend itself to having a proper full-on jazzy solo in the outro, so it's more like a little lick that's played on the Rhodes. Again, you'll probably hear the modulation that's achieved with the wah-wah pedal.
Runaway soldier. They say you lost your head. Runaway soldier. They say you're better dead. Maybe when I throw up both my hands. Maybe when I throw up both my hands. Runaway soldier. They say you lost your head. Runaway soldier. They say you're better dead.
Another nice little thing to note there, which was pretty common those days, was that you do a nice little linear fade on the outro, because you know we used to try and we used to sample our beats off other people's records, just to get a nice little loop to incorporate in our drum programming. Now, it would be great if you could find a 12-inch, because normally what people would normally do is they'd use they'd have 8 bars of the drums on the outro, and that would be the bit that we'd be searching for to sample and take a little loop. So if you did like a nice little linear fade on the outro like that, it'd be very hard for anyone else to nick our beats. I know, silly little idea, but it was quite commonplace. So there you have it, a walkthrough of Banana Republic remix of Boundaries by Lena Conquest. Hopefully I'm going to do a few more walkthrough videos very soon, but in the meantime please subscribe to my YouTube channel. Thanks, bye.